now.
Thank you, Mom.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome again to the second webinar in our series. We're just waiting. People are still coming in, so we'll give them a minute. Okay, thank you very much. This is, just as a reminder, this is the Environmental Education webinar series hosted by WESSA Schools Program. Unfortunately, you won't have the privilege to see my face today, but you can hear my beautiful voice and my Cape Town accent. It's coming through very strong here. Before I hand over to Cindy, I just want to again take you through the house rules if you were not with us the last time. The house rules is that only panelists will view the video, only panelists' videos will be displayed, so you will see myself, or you will hear myself, you will see Cindy, Dora, and Mrs. Magaya. And then you can use the question and answer section to ask any questions, and we will, at the end, there's a section in the program where we will ask the speakers your questions. And then Cindy will introduce a poll question just to get your feel, your sense about the topic that we're talking about today, and that you will respond in the chat box, but Cindy will give instruction. At the end of the session, we will post the recorded webinar on our website. You can go to our WESSA website, go to News, Media, and Video. That is where you will find the website. And now I will hand over to Cindy, who is facilitating the session today.
Great. Okay, thanks, Lemise. And good afternoon, everyone. My name is Cindy, and I'll be your facilitator for today's webinar. I feel that, you know, we've all adapted to this new way of life. And even though our minds still long for the old normal or for a way to connect the past to the future, there is a sense of acknowledging that we can't reach back for normal. And that we need to reach for better, and better in every sense, hence our topic for today, environmental justice. So before we really get into it, like Lemise said, I would like for you to use the chat function here to just let us know what comes to mind when you think of environmental justice. Is there a specific case that you remember, a specific word, or even a specific feeling? Let us know in the chat section what comes to mind when you think about environmental justice. So we know about inequalities. We as environmentalists, as teachers, as parents, as economists, we have an opportune moment to do our work and live our lives from a point of justice going forward. We cannot leave environmental justice behind anymore. But also to work towards environmental justice, we need to understand environmental racism. We need to understand that environmental racism is not a new form of marginalization, but that it is a systematically supported system all over the world, not just in South Africa. So let's take, for example, climate change. In the simplest explanation, really climate change is a product of white supremacy, colonization over the last 500 years, where certain groups of people felt that it was justified to exploit other groups of people and land. So then for me, looking at this very simple explanation, climate change is not an environmental issue alone, or at all for that matter, but rather climate change is an issue of justice. So we cannot learn enough about environmental justice and how we work towards it in our work, in our everyday lives should be a point of departure for environmental work and social work. And so the two guests that we've invited today will give you two perspectives on environmental justice. Mrs. Dora Marema, who's worked in this field for over 25 years, will give us a bit of a background and a broader understanding of what environmental justice and environmental racism is, and also give us an introduction to the concept eco-fascism, which has really reared its head during the COVID-19 pandemic. Our second speaker for the day will be Mrs. Rose Magaya, who's a teacher at Gianna Secondary School here in Tembisa, and she will give us a teacher's and a grassroots perspective of someone who's been involved with different environmental organizations and with different environmental projects at a school level and at a community level. So you can, like Lemi said, you can ask your questions and put comments in the Q&A session of this webinar, and the speakers will then address them after both of their presentations. So we'll leave all of the questions and answer session towards the end when both of the speakers have spoken. So Dora, I will now hand over to you to start with your presentation, and then we'll go to Mrs. Magaya after that. Over to you, Dora.
Thank you so much, Cindy and Lamise and everyone for the opportunity for me to be able to participate in this talk. So privileged to be able to have this opportunity. Yeah, and I think the topic that you're addressing is quite a very, the topics, I think, is a whole range of topics that you would like us to address. They're, rather, I think when I reflect on my 25 years in this sector, issues that we do not very much talk about. I think on the top of that list is the environmental issue of environmental racism. We talk a lot recently about climate justice and environmental justice, but we dare not go to the issue of environmental racism. I remember Life Africa held a conference on this, I think in 2018, if I'm not mistaken. It was a very difficult conversation and topic to address. So I think, most of what I'll be sharing is just as my own reflections, as someone who has been in this sector. And I think it's important to highlight that the issue of environmental racism has been with us for like a long time. And I liked your introduction. It is not something that has just came in and vanished. In fact, I believe that is something that we have just managed to take off the radar and put underneath. And I think it may be an issue that we need to tackle to be able to solve some of the challenges that we are facing right now. Because I think when you look at that, in South Africa, we still have a lot of what I can say underprivileged or resource poor communities really living on the margins. If you look in particular in Johannesburg right now during the season of dust, and you look at what happens when you move out of the leafy suburbs from Johannesburg to go into the south of Johannesburg. When you go to the area southwest, we go to Soweto, Dobsonville, and all of those areas there. When you go to the East Rand also, when you go to the Vaal, when you go to all those communities, you can see the conditions under which they live. And I think it was a systematic thing. It was the way that the city was designed to be able to put the underprivileged communities in these outskirts where the mining was happening. Where right now in this season, you go there, you come back, your eyes are burning because of the dust from the mine dumps. The water is polluted, the land is polluted, you can't use it. And I think, this is what continues. The informal settlements continue to sprawl around there. And I think this is something that we haven't really talked about and looked at. Now that the people have settled there and they're there because of historical reasons, what now? What do we do right now? And I think because of that, a lot of people continue to be, to be affected by all sorts of things. When you look at the issue of the health issues, those people are prone. I mean, the people in the Vaal they are prone to respiratory sicknesses because of the air pollution that exists there. And I think government also know the levels of pollution in the communities in the Vaal, the level of pollutions of the people living in the West Rand, the water that is completely inhabitable, the animals that die because of that. But I think, you know, for many decades, when, you know, the popular kind of focus of environmental issues has always been centered around the issue of conservation, and not very much around the issues of, you know, the social issues. And I think it has been, you know, it's our responsibility to be able to make sure that when you talk about environment, we do not leave the people. And of course, we always look at the people as being the part of the problem when we talk about environmental degradation. But I think we use a very simplistic way of defining the human factor in terms of when you talk about environmental degradation, because who's that? Who are these people that we are talking about? You will find very much that these are corporates. These are big business that are able to go and mine after they get the rights, the licenses, and leave those areas really worse than how they found them, polluted. And the people who are, on the other hand, who are suffering from this, even though, yes, the environment is suffering, but there are people at the center of this injustice who have to settle on the land that is polluted, who have to drink the water that is polluted, who have to breathe the air that is heavily polluted. And as a result, paying the price generationally because it continues, and it's been, even before I came to Johannesburg, or for many, many decades, it has been like that. And I think shying away from the issue of tackling these fundamental issues, it is about the issue of putting profits before the people, which has led to the situation. And it unfortunately, it still continues, where a lot of our people have been, settling on this land, but they only have the surface rights and not the mineral rights. They don't own what sits underneath them, but they own, even if they have ownership, it's very much reduced to stuff that is really on top. So the environmental justice struggles, are cutting across many of these communities, and I think that's the time when the issue of environmental justice was coined. That when we talk about the issue of environment, we cannot remove the issue of justice from it, which is really the issue where we see most Black South Africans continue to live on the most damaged land, in the most polluted neighborhoods, near coal-fired power stations, steel mills, incinerators, and waste sites. And then on top of that, we know that many millions of them are still without clean air, without clean water, and without services. No electricity, no sewage works, right? So this is the situation that is in the center of this environmental injustice or environmental racism. When we talk about, the issue of environmental justice, now looking at an issue where, we bring in a whole lot of issues around people's access to clean air, people's access to clean water, people's access to land, but not just land, but productive and clean land, people's access to energy, just like everyone else, right? And not only talking about that when we talk about a certain segment of our society. And I think that's why when we, in the issues of climate justice or climate change, when we talk about the term that was coined the just transition, in as much as we realize that we cannot base the economy of this country or on coal, we also need to realize that it's not everyone who've got access to even this coal-fired electricity that has been produced. Our people still don't have access to electricity, let alone a clean form of electricity. Challenging the issues of the jobs and environmental protection, because even though many of them live in these areas or next to coal mines or next to power stations and all of these things, they are also reliant on those for jobs. And how do you now balance between environmental protection and the issues of livelihoods? So this is an issue that has been there from colonial apartheid times, where the discourse has been very much about protecting the threatened plants, animals, and the wild in the wilderness, and very much removing or neglecting the issue of the health, of the labor, and the development issues that are surrounding environmental issues. So, also, not really paying attention to the issue of dispossessions, land dispossessions, for example, which is the other side of conservation, where people were forcibly removed from the productive land or from areas that were pristine, where they'd been living in harmony with the environment, to make way for national parks and the so-called protected areas. And in that process, people losing land and their livelihoods. That's the other part of this conservation debate that has not been thoroughly looked at. And I think the concept of environmental justice provides us with a radical alternative to this discourse of conservation. Starting to question the market's ability to bring about social and environmental sustainability. We just believe that you can't separate environmental from social sustainability. They always have to go together. It affirms the value for all forms of life, and not only just for the wilderness and for the animals, but also for the people who live on that land. So it also gives us it presents a powerful challenge to the concept of sustainable development and the increase of commodification and financialization of the nature packaged as the green economy, which is now the current thing that is there, right? Usually, so that's something, it sounds great, but what is contained inside this? So, it's for communities, it's important that their everyday kind of life issues of lack of access to water, electricity, and productive land is also integrated in the issue of environment. So for me, these are the critical issues. Even when we talk about climate change, and we talk about climate mitigation and adaptation, I think mitigation very much, because it's the concept that allows the government or the country to be able to be in line with the Paris Agreement and reduce its own carbon emissions. We forget that there's a huge population of this country which doesn't contribute largely to the carbon emissions of this country. Because, as I mentioned, many of them don't have access to electricity, whatever. So who in this within a country is contributing, and who is being impacted? Who should be focused on when you talk about adaptation? Who should be the ones that are really paying the price in terms of the carbon tax and all of that stuff? So in the same way as we talk about climate justice in the international arena, where we talk about the issue of the global south that is suffering the impacts of climate change, even though they contributed very less, and the issue of the global north that must bear the responsibility of cutting down their own carbon emissions, but also investing resources in terms of finance, access to technology and information for the global community, particularly the global south, to be able to adapt and to mitigate climate change. The same thing happens within the countries. Within the very countries that are part of the global south, and like our own, which is one of the most unequal society that we live in, it's not everyone that is contributing, or it's not everyone who's going to be affected the same. There are people with 3 cars, big houses, 4 fridges, whatever, a stove with an oven for baking and for the meat and for all of that. And, unfortunately, those are the people that we should be preaching the issue of reducing our carbon footprint. But for the many masses who still don't have access to electricity, not access to services, no access to productive land, whatever, what about those? And it's also in that context when we talk about a just transition, meaning we have to make sure that the people who don't have access are having access, and how are we going to be able to do that? So these issues are very important, because you can't club the global South countries as victims, and they suffered because of the global North and whatever, because even within the very countries, you've got that dilemma of the people who are contributors and people who are on the receiving end, even though they contribute. And also in the issue of vulnerability, if there is a storm or whatever, something comes, who's going to bounce back quicker from from the cyclone Ida, for example, that ravaged Mozambique and Zimbabwe and Malawi? Is the people with access to resources, and who are those, right? So even within the countries, we need to be talking. That's when we talk about climate justice. It's those kind of issues, and there are people who would need a lot of support for them to be able to adjust and even to come back. The same thing happens with COVID-19. It's the same. We saw how the food was hoarded from the supermarkets. Those who were waiting for month end to get paid from the casual jobs of car washers, domestic workers, sometimes casual domestic workers, gardeners, whatever, who only gets paid once a month, and at the end of the month, were not able to get access to those resources. And that's a clear example of an unequal society, and issues like COVID-19 epidemic making those communities even more vulnerable, because they don't have access to resources for them to be able to adapt, to get, enough food so that by the time the lockdown is introduced, they are safe. In fact, they can't afford it because they live month to month, or sometimes they're not sure about their next income, where it's going to come from. So for me, those are some of the issues that I would like to raise, that environment is not only about conserving the natural environment, as we call it, that environmental sustainability goes hand in hand with social sustainability, and really looking at how, if we're bringing in any interventions or initiatives, how are those interventions addressing the issues of environmental and social sustainability, knowing that there's still lots of our people, even right now, who are living on the outskirts in the mine dumps, not by choice, but by design of how the cities have been designed. They live there on that unproductive land. They live with the smell of the waste dumps, living with the dust of the mine dumps, and there's no responsibility on these corporates to rehabilitate those mines. And the people, many times, they are not able to even challenge them, because that's where they get their daily bread. That's where they work. That's where they go and get that little bit of income. So being caught between a rock and a hard place, not having a choice to be able to buy the hand of the one that feeds you. But those of us who don't have to be begging, going with a begging bowl, we have a responsibility. We have a responsibility because this country has got laws. I grew up knowing about the polluter shall pay principle, wondering what happened to it. I grew up in Limpopo, in my own village. We were challenging a granite mine, wanting to find out where is the trust that is holding the money for these mining companies, to pay funds to be able to clean up after they have done the damage. I'm yet to see a lot of that happening. And in fact, I don't know where that, and even until today, we see that there is a strong bias towards the mining companies everywhere, including in Kolobeni. People are losing their lives because we are pro-profits in a way, because it's not only just mining, it's other developments as well, where the people are not consulted and the people's lives are not being valued. To be able to say, when a development comes, where are these people going to be settled if we're just saying we will remove them because we're going to get a huge investment in this country is going to contribute to the economy, an economy that doesn't factor the lives of the people, that doesn't even begin to cost, because I don't know how you're going to cost someone's life. Yeah. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Dora. That definitely gives us a lot of food for thought. I mean, and some communities do settle in the areas where they do, whether it's mining or any kind of like production that basically like goes into the core of the earth. But they still want to drink clean water. They still want to breathe clean air. You know, so those are the things that we need to address. If you have any questions for Dora, please drop them in the Q&A section of this webinar or on the chat section of this webinar. I'm now going to give over to Mrs. Magaya to give a teacher's and a kind of like on the ground perspective of environmental justice. Ma'am Magaya, over to you. Please share your screen with us. Just hold on, ma'am. You're still on mute. Just unmute yourself.
My dream is to help people.
Thank you very much, Dora. Thank you very much, Cindy. Dora has alluded a lot of information in terms of environmental justice. We act as we claim for environmental justice, but are we in this together? Let's not pretend. You find that when we define environmental justice, it can be defined as the fair treatment and involvement of all people, the communities, regardless of race, color, nationality, and their economic status, pertaining to their surroundings. What do we mean by surroundings? We are talking of the home, we're talking of the workplace, we're talking of the school, we're talking of the community parks where most of our children do spend most of their time playing. Are those places safe for each and every one of us? Environmental justice calls for action against environmental inequalities. Everybody must have the same access to resources and degree of protection from environmental conditions and also all the environmental health hazards. This environmental justice must address all the issues which pertain to the people's livelihoods. There must be democracy. There must not be any discrimination, like what Dora has indicated. People are really marginalized. If you go back to Section 24 of the Bill of Rights, every person must have the right to clean, safe, health, and just environment. Is that what it is like? People must play, people must learn, people must work in safe environments. Looking at the relationships, also as the first speaker has indicated, people must come first in whatever development which needs to be established. Which means we must look at the economic, the environmental, the social, and the political spheres. And then also to add on to environmental racism, like alluded before, most of the poor people, where do you find them? You find them in places where there are dump sites. You find them in places where there's sewage flowing all over, as if we don't have any environmental programs happening, as if we don't have any environmental organizations around. These people are exposed to a lot of new environmental nuisances. You find that some individuals, some political parties, they want to pertain their gains instead of focusing on what the people around them needs. The poor people, do they have a voice? No, they don't have a voice. You find them, like what Dola has indicated, staying in places with a lot of risks. Even when you go to our workplaces, many people have died in the workplaces because the workplaces are not safe. There's a threatening indication that 20,000 of South Africans every year, they do die from pollution. But what's happening? You find that more and more places which result in environmental pollution are being established. For example, the South Durban oil refineries. Why are they there? They are there because somebody wants to make profit. What about the people? The people around you. Are you not considering them? We need to consider people. If you look at the reality of environmental racism, just looking at what's happening in Khayelitsha and compare to what's happening in Rosebank suburb, you can see the discrepancies. There in Khayelitsha, they are wires, electrical wires, which are crisscrossing, which means people there are obviously in danger. If one shack catches fire there, all the shacks are going to be destroyed. And then look at the sanitation. It's really pathetic. Looking at this time, this period in time, people are still using the bucket system. Where are you, environmental organizations? What is it that you're busy with? And then you compare with Rosebank suburb, very clean. Looking at it's green, all over, green. So really, people must have the same resources. If you want people to have the clean environment, do it for everybody. Why not do it for one class and then leave the other class out? So in a nutshell, environmental justice means correcting those inequalities and making sure that everybody benefits, when everybody must have the clean, the healthy, aesthetic, and sustainable environment, regardless of their status. We have importance of environmental sustainability projects in schools. There is an organization which is WESSA. It has 3 categories: the Eco Schools program, the learning about forests, and the young reporters for the environment. How do they, what's the pathway to environmental justice according to the school levels? Because this is what I'm going to focus on. Learners are taught in the classroom. After being taught in the classroom, what they do after getting that knowledge, they are going to embark on a number of action projects related to what they've learned in the classroom. Maybe it's about climate change. They need to know what are the impacts of climate change, and also find out how they can find mitigation measures for that climate change. And then after that, they inspire change. How do they inspire change? They go out to their communities and make people aware of what is happening. The number of ways in which schools can ensure environmental justice. We have schools which grow vegetables, and these vegetables are given to the learners through the school feeding scheme, and the surplus can be given to the community. And this is in line with SDG number 2, which advocates for zero hunger. We have water justice. In some of the schools, including the school which I'm representing, Gianna Secondary School, there are water tanks which have been donated. In case of these ones, donated by Kelvin Power Station. It's a way of making sure that we save our water resources, considering that South Africa is a water-scarce country. We need to use our water wisely. So we teach the learners at school and then make sure that these learners, when they go home, they are going to employ what they will have learned at school. We also do water harvesting and using grey water for watering plants as a way of ensuring that we have enough water supplies in future. Climate justice. How do we resolve this issue of climate change, which everybody is talking about now? We all know the devastating impacts of climate change. Schools do plant trees, especially on Arbor Day. So it's done each and every year. And this is done in order for these schools and all the other areas, because learners also go to the communities and help with the planting of trees. This would mitigate global warming and also ensure that we do mitigate climate change, which is SDG number 13. Waste justice. We have to find ways of making sure that waste does not reach the landfill. Very little waste, if at all it has to reach. At a school scenario, there is a lot of waste which is produced. The printing papers, learners do throw a lot of litter around, so they have to be taught. They have to take action, and they have to collect that waste and find ways of making sure they do limit the amount of waste within their school. So just imagine each and every school taking that initiative. It means we're not going to have a lot of land pollution, especially from plastic. There is documentation that by the year 2030, we might end up having more plastic than fish. And what are we going to eat? It means it's going to compromise our food resources. Schools do help each other. Like Gianna Sender School went to a primary school and had to help them in reducing their waste at school level. Waste justice, biodiversity justice. When it comes to biodiversity, we need to live also in harmony with our biodiversity. We need to maintain those ecosystems, because if we break one chain, it means we are going to dismantle the whole ecosystem, and it might even also come back on us. So learners are taught how to conserve biodiversity, and in most cases, they do establish biodiversity gardens within their school locality. In this instance, they also use their school locality to do their projects on ecosystems. Like in grade 11, even grade 10, learners do focus on ecosystems. Energy justice. Schools do find ways of reducing the carbon emissions, knowing very well that in South Africa, a lot of our energy that we are using comes from coal. So there's a way that a school can do in order to reduce the use of non-renewable sources of energy. Like in this case, we have biogas digester, which was implemented at a school, and the biogas digester is fed using waste from the school garden. Environmental entrepreneurship. This plays a key role in the livelihoods of learners. They can use the skills which they will have acquired in schools. Like in the instance, learners made some flower pots. They made them from sand. We know the impact of sand on our ecosystems, on our rivers. So this reduced siltation. They also used paper, which also reduced the waste within the school area. And learners, they are being taught, they are actually making some artifacts from beads. And then this will help them. Even when they finish school, they're not gonna lie around or walk around being jobless. We have the young reporters for the environment. They really play a key role in environmental awareness. This is showing a picture which was taken by a learner just to show how bad our environment is. That's a place in Tembisa. Importance of the environmental programs at schools and communities towards environmental just societies. When these learners get the information from school, they will be able to use that information, and then they will be able to address both those local and global environmental issues. Learners are also prepared. How are they prepared? They are prepared to become conscious in their lives, which means whenever they go as leaders, they're not going to be leaders who are not conscious of their environment. Whatever projects, whatever they do politically, socially, is going to help instigate change for the betterment of the environment. Learners engage in practical justice issues because they may take pictures like the previous picture, and then they convey it to the local authorities. The local authorities will then take action. Awareness is raised through brainstorming, because a lot of researches are done by the learners themselves. The learners become advocates. Some of them would work even in green jobs because they will have seen what they will have done within their schools. And some may even become climate activists. We have some organizations. Are they really doing their work? Some of them are not even seen, or they are seen in pockets. But there are some, which include WESSA. WESSA uses the principle, catch them young. Because when you catch them young, they are going to have a lot of impact as they grow to the next stage. Even when they go to their communities, a lot of change is going to be seen. And these people, when they collaborate, the organization, the WESSA organization, it works with teachers, it works with the community in order to make sure that the local environment even extends to, it extends all the way from the city of Cape Town right across to the deep rural Limpopo. And they also have education and youth programs. We have SAMBI, which works with communities in order to conserve biodiversity and also with learners. We have the ESA. They are prominent in KZN and they help learners to run businesses, environmental businesses, which means when these learners, when they become business people in future, they will know how to develop their businesses. They are not going to develop a business which is going to destroy the environment. We have Project 90 by 2030. This one advocates for just energy transition, which means people are being mobilized to move away from the renewable sources of energy so that we can use the renewable. They move away from the non-renewable and then they would come on board to use the renewable sources of energy. The Cape Town Environmental Education Trust. This is also a key organization because it conducts environmental programs in schools and helps also learners to conserve nature within their locality. Failures, like Grace alluded, people are dying. People are in places where there's a lot of pollution. But you find that in places like Tembisa, it appears like a normal thing to walk across sewage. It appears like a normal thing to walk across a dump site. But when you come to places like Center, you wouldn't find such. It would be like a taboo. Environmental organizations, where are you? Where are you? You need to wake up and make sure that you focus also on these poor communities. Who is going to help them if you're not there to help them? The realities of COVID-19, just to add on to what Doris also said, it exposed the risk of overcrowding. How can you expect somebody to isolate themselves when they are staying in a house with more than 10 people? That's not practical. The Equal Education Organization also revealed that there's poor sanitation in most of the township schools. We all know of the story of Michael. Michael died after having drowned in human sewage. That's pathetic. But you find that some schools have got very beautiful toilets. And then if you look at the organizations which are operating, the environmental groups which are operating, it's only those which are largely owned by whites. And these they get a lot of funding. And where do they use those the funding which they get? They go to the white areas, white-dominated areas, and they develop the white-dominated areas and ensure that the people there are in a safe environment. And our township-based environmental organizations, even if they have the edge, even if they have the power, the willing power, because they have a shoestring budget, they won't be able to help the people around them. Typical illustration of environmental racism. Just look at this place. Recent occurrence, 11 July 2020. These are people who are almost drowning in a stream. And where there are their houses, these are their houses. Environmental organizations, where are you? You need to help these people. Best practice. What is it that can be done? The environmental organizations which claim to be environmental organizations and which claim to be helping people, they have to identify those areas where there are injustices. Go to places where people are marginalized and help and overcome these disparities which we are seeing now. They must involve all the educators, because educators have a lot of impact on trying to bring in change in society. They must involve the parents, they must involve the wider community so that these environmental issues are solved. And the educators, even if some of them might be willing to help in combating programs like climate change, some of them don't have the know-how, so they need to be empowered. They have to be given resources. These learners, they do environmental research, but then even if they do their environmental researches, be it on climate change, you find that these researches are only left on paper. They are not even conveyed to the authorities so that authorities can work And with the communities, they can work with the school, create maybe a database so that they can solve environmental issues within. And also looking at the differences in the way resources are distributed in schools. The well-resourced schools must go and help the under-resourced schools. And the bottom-up approach has to be used. In a way of concluding, environmental justice must be pursued. Those adverse environmental impacts shall not be distributed in such a manner that they are unfair, and they must not discriminate against any person, particularly vulnerable and disadvantaged persons. Why should you care? Because this is your problem. This is my problem, and it is our problem. So we have to work together. So in everything that you do, public participation should be a key to every development. I thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Magaya, for that very passionate presentation. It's good to see the on-the-ground grassroots level of understanding of environmental justice, as well as how you perceive it as a school teacher. I'm going to hand over to Lemise now. We've got a few questions for our two guest speakers. So Lemise, can you please direct some of the questions to our panelists?
Okay, thank you. I'll start with questions for Dora. So please tell us to what extent the environment and justice problems created by corporates are being policed by government. We get the feeling that government is not really serious about climate and the environmental justice. They should be making polluters pay. Dora, would you like to respond, or?
You know, I think it's safe to say that there is no enforcement. I think this applies to all aspects of our country, where we have brilliant policies that are in place, but the enforcement is the thing that is lacking, right? Mm. So I haven't seen any rehabilitation, including in the village where I come from. I haven't seen any rehabilitation whatsoever, and I'm one of the people who have been trying to take the companies to court over that policy, over that legislation, for them to be able to rehabilitate and to compensate, not only just because children died, drowned in open pits. I'm just giving my own village's account. And until this day, the government just came and buried the kids and gave some groceries to the families, and that's really about it, right? And so yeah, and then no sharing of the social and labor plans from many of these. And I'm referring to mine because that's, I've got a closer experience with that. So definitely there hasn't been any, I don't think there's any enforcement at all. I think the country's, the focus is on other things and not necessarily on environmental, seriously environmental issues. And we know that, yeah. Okay, let me end there because I'm gonna start saying.
Okay, and then Harun Mohammed asked an important question around how do we strengthen the teaching and learning of environmental justice in schools, universities, communities? Are there models, materials to assist teachers and lecturers and community organizations?
Is it to me as well, right?
Yeah.
So I think one of the most important things for us is to actually make sure that the children are learning the current, about the current issues, like the serious issues, not what we were told before, that the environment is about this, about animals and plants and whatever. It's also to bring in that element, the flip side of these issues, which includes the issues of health and development and all of these things. That the children need to be learning in schools, and maybe a bit of tours for them to go and visit some of these things, for them to be able to witness and to talk to the people who've been affected. Because I believe, there are some children who will never be exposed to these environments, and this issue of environmental injustice will just become one of those things that they will grow up and not really have a frame of reference. It will remain a theory or a story that is there without any grounding. So yeah, I think it's important that we do that. And there are a lot of then there are a lot of community action groups and people who are challenging injustices and whatever. And I think environment needs to find itself in there, because we cannot be able to separate the issues of environment from the issues of poverty, the issues of health, you know, and welfare. All of these things, they are so intertwined, because the environment that the people live in will influence the performance of the kids at schools, will influence how vulnerable the people are to sicknesses and epidemics and all of these things. That you know, the encouragement should be for people to fight integrated struggles, and not just, you know, a struggle for health or a struggle for housing and a struggle for this and that, for water, but we need to bring it together, because all of these things are interrelated. You know, they don't live by themselves. They are connected to each other. As you resolve the one, and the others will start to fall into place.
And maybe I think we can pose the same question to Mrs. Magaya, who is a teacher. Mrs. Magaya, the question was, how do we strengthen the teaching and learning of environmental justice in schools?
Resources are required. And also the curriculum, the way in which it's designed, it has to cater for each and every learner at each and every stage. And there should be monitoring also by these environmental organizations, because in most cases, they're not seen. Yes, the curriculum has something to do with the environment, but the organizations, they're the ones who have the know-how. They are the ones with the expertise. I believe that if they move from school to school and then maybe empower those learners, it's going to work much better than what it is like now.
Okay, thanks, Louise. You can go to the next question.
There's a lot of questions geared towards government and the private sector. So I'll just read one that I think represents. I just want to find out, how can city councils, municipal councils, and other relevant authorities work together to integrate spatial, socioeconomic, and environmental policies to achieve sustainability within our communities?
Yeah, I mean, I can be able to respond. And I think we've got bylaws, we've got councillors, we've got the IDP processes that are there, that the communities need to be participating to be able to make sure that some of the issues that they're struggling with find themselves there, so that they can be budgeted for at a city or municipal level for them to be resolved. If they need access to clean water and all of these things. So we need to really encourage people to be able to be active, to know the importance of participating in these IDP processes. Because I think historically people have just not seen the importance of engaging the municipality or the local government to be able to voice voice out their concerns, or to make sure that some of the issues that are affecting them are part of the plans that are put in place, so that they can, because you can't just raise up something outside of that process of the IDP and expect that, you know, there is a budget for it. So there's a process for it. And I think all of us, we need to be active citizens. We have the right to be able to request open processes, consultation, but we must equally meet that with the responsibility for us to show up and to be able to contribute constructively, and then monitor the implementation to make sure that what we raised and is now lends itself in an IDP document, and that is budgeted for and is actually being delivered on within that period. So, but I know that, you know, there's a challenge there with our people really being diligent, showing up and persisting, because it is going to take a lot from us as well, to be able to take hands with the local government in that way, to make sure that there is change where people are situated.
Okay.
Just before, I know that Dora has to unfortunately leave us at 3 o'clock because she's got another webinar that she's got to attend to. So Dora, maybe from your side, any concluding remarks? I know that we are starting the conversation now, and there's a lot of environmental organizations and environmentalists present here today. Is there any parting words, any concluding remarks from your side for people attending the webinar today, for us to be able to like work to a more environmentally just future in South Africa?
Yeah, and I think, I mean, from my perspective is that it starts with us, those of us who are aware and those of us who are in this sector, in this work, to be able to educate our people, to take them along with us. People are living hopeless right now, really a lot of struggles, right? Like when we talk about pandemic, it's an added layer, right? So there are layers and layers that are being added onto our people, and they just feel helpless, and they just like living almost surrendered lives. And I think it's really up to us, those who know that the polluters should be able to mass pay, and look at how we can come up with programs to really make sure that they are able to pay. They are paying because that's their responsibility. And that when developments come, we need to be able to make sure that we demand to be consulted, to be able to go there and to raise our voices, and not just as like professional consultees, and look at broad-based consultation processes that are taking in consideration the voices of the people. You know, to open up a consultation process that is online, where you need to make a submission and all of these things, it excludes millions of our people who are not able to read and write. And how do we make sure that some of us whose names are always first when they think about a law or something to consult, because they know that you may take them to task, are saying, I would like you to show up in my community in Dobsonville, so you can be able to come there, and I will prepare a hall with my people there so that you can come and address us. Because usually there's the issue of the resource constraint, where they will say government doesn't have enough resources for them to be able to organize these and mobilize whatever. But that's our responsibility, those of us who are on the ground and working in these communities, to mobilize our people, so that we just wait for one official or whoever person to come and present to us about this, or someone from that company to come and tell us about this development in the midst of our people, that in the language that they understand, using the methodologies and the platform, the mechanics that they will be able to understand. Because a lot of people are just signing up to things that they don't actually know, and communities are being pitched against one another, where false information is being given to say so and so is blocking job opportunities for you, you know. So, and we've seen it where corporates are coming in and causing real conflict within communities, where communities end up killing each other. So it starts with us to hold those we know as having a responsibility to task, to make sure that developments are for the people, are centered around the people and the planet and everything that lives in it. And for us, it is important to know that the people that live on the land are as important as the plants and the animals that live on it. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Dora, for availing yourself today. It's always inspirational talking to you. With your experience, I feel like we need more people on the ground to be able to like interact with all the issues that are interlinked, not just from an environmental point of view, but the social, the economic, the cultural, as well as the political. I wish you well. We'll take a few more questions as we say goodbye to Dora for Mrs. Magaya, and then we'll do concluding remarks and hand over to Louise. Louise, I see that there is a question for Mrs. Magaya, so maybe you can do that one before we take concluding remarks.
Okay, thank you very much, Dora, for joining us today. The question is for Mrs. Magaya. How do we as NGOs working with schools get teachers like herself involved as agents of change and environmental justice activists, given all the challenges that teachers face?
Thank you for that question. I believe people should know that there are programs like the Eco Schools program. I've been to quite a number of schools. It's like the teachers are not aware of that, because I'm speaking from experience. If the teachers do join a program which enhances the development of the learner, which provides the learner with a lot of environmental education, and then act upon that, really, we're gonna see a lot of change. Because if the teachers also are provided with resources, they'll be able to empower themselves. When they empower themselves, they're going to empower the learners, and then from there, empower the whole nation.
Thank you, ma'am. And then I think the last one would be, how do we change the mindset of rich people that consume resources in abundance with an arrogant mind of I can afford it?
That one has to start from the grassroots level, and a lot of talking about the lives of the poor and the lives of the rich. These rich people need to behave like normal human beings. They mustn't see the poor people like they are less human. We are also humans. I'm just putting myself in that position. We are also humans, so they need to change their minds and work also and share their resources with these other poor people. How do we change their minds? We need to mobilize the people. Environmental organizations have to go to these people and then maybe organize talks with these rich people, with these people with a lot of money who look down upon the poor, who think the poor are the ones who are supposed to live in places where there's a lot of sewage flowing, who believe that the poor people are supposed to live in places where there's a lot of sewage. So we need to make sure that these people are told that the poor people are also humans. They also need to stay in places with clean air, places with clean water, and so forth.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think towards a stronger education system that reaches all in terms of sustainability, environmental and social justice, and that it should not only be directed towards one group or only schools, but an education approach that can reach everybody. So, Mrs. Magaya, is there any final words from your side before we close off?
My final word would be, whatever people do for one society, they must also do it for the other society. Why discriminate others? Yet we are all human beings. So we need to work together as individuals, as communities, to help and save the earth, because we are living in the same earth. So if you leave the poor people to pollute the earth, it also comes back to you as a rich person, and you also suffer some of the consequences. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think in closing, we live in a unique time now to start talking about reimagining a better world, better in every aspect, whether it is gender-based violence, corruption, food security, and of course our natural environment, to create a higher quality of life for all. And I think this for all is something that we've missed in the past, and especially when it comes to the environment. The environment really doesn't belong to one specific person, yet only a few have access to it. And so with environmental and justice awareness, that can be the turning point for ecology politics in South Africa. It can help us to think about, wild green spaces, not just from an ecological perspective, but it can also help us to look at inhabited places and how people are actually a part of the environment. So visibility, consciousness from us who are working within the sector is really what communities on the margins need right now, so that when we as WESSA and other organizations, other departments, when we commit to work with communities to create a better environment for everybody, it will really come from a place where the justice and the equality benefits everybody equally. Or in places, in instances where a big mining company, for example, is in a specific area, all of the disadvantages should also reach everybody equally. So whether we benefit, whether we are disadvantaged, it should be distributed equally. And that is kind of like the point that Dora is trying to make. And for us to have a conversation, to start the conversation, rather than, I think, pointing fingers, let's have a conversation in terms of where we are, where can we go from here onwards, now that we have this opportunity, and who do we need to include to get to that point of environmental justice. Lemise, that's it from my side. You can please let the guests know in terms of like the next webinar. And we'll share the link, as well as we'll also answer all the questions that haven't been answered within the session right now.
Thank you very much, Cindy. And thank you everybody once again for joining us. It's a Friday afternoon. It's the end of the month, but you guys are here listening to environmental justice. We appreciate that. So we would like to see you again on the 6th of October at 2 o'clock for our next webinar. This will be hosted by my colleague, Nkumbu Ndlovu. And the topic is food sovereignty in our lifetime. So if you have, we will send information about this as soon as possible. We'll also share who the guest speakers are. And we hope to see you then. So thank you very much again for joining us. And as Cindy said, we will answer all the questions that has not been answered. We will answer it. And please catch our webinar, the recorded webinar, both on YouTube and on our WESSA page. And you go specifically to media and videos. That's where you will find all the webinars that has been recorded before. Thank you very much and enjoy your weekend. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.